First they took my sight, and now they want to take the ability for me to touch things and feel the world. It's madness. Madness. On a more serious note, I hope that you are safe. I hope that you are healthy. This is a bit of a collaborative video on how people in the blind community have been really struggling or challenged by this pandemic. And for those of you who've reached out, thank you. I've been fine. I've been doing okay. I got the necessities that I need right now for the next few weeks. I may be presented with some challenges moving forward. We'll see. No, we won't. You might see. I won't see. I don't see. I'm legally blind. What I'm hoping to accomplish with this video is a way for us to connect for a moment. I want to talk a little bit about my experience with this whole pandemic, and I hope to hear from you in the comments and how you've been dealing with it, whether or not you're blind or maybe you have some other disability or you have some other circumstance that has kind of made this sort of unique, or maybe not even unique, and you just have something to share or say, or something that you saw. Whatever it is, however you've been kind of impacted by this pandemic, I'm curious. Let me know in the comments down below. It's kind of an open forum, and we can all kind of chime in, talk about it, or just hear from one another. I think one of the most important things right now is, yes, distance yourself physically as much as possible, which, believe me, for a blind person who oftentimes needs physical assistance, is kind of hard in a time like this. Secondly, it's about not necessarily distancing yourself socially. I totally encourage to be as social as you can. Obviously, physical contact is different, and people should have their bubble, their space bubble. We should be able to connect through the internet, through text, through calling, whatever it is. I'm talking to my loved ones more often than I have for a while, and I think I've been hearing that a lot more from other people too. Just using this time the best that we can. If you're not directly kind of impacted with what is happening necessarily, do your part, stay home, let's connect with one another with the resources that we have. Even with this video, I wanted to make this collaborative. I wanted to reach out with other people in my community and kind of hear from them, and whether it be just from a tweet or even further with video conferencing someone in to talk about maybe some things that they recommend doing to help pass the time, or some resources that they're aware of, even just to vent about what is happening and to still keep our human connections relevant and alive, because that's what's important. Most of the human contact actually that I've had in the last several days is just from Uber Eats delivery person who is bringing me food. These apps and services are very much just convenience and accessibility tools that I use regularly. Now, one of the things that has obviously been impacted is how much demand there is on these apps now. For instance, Amazon Prime and Fresh. I used to get my groceries just through delivery, and now it's nearly impossible to get a time slot on those, at least for the time being, because there's just so many people and there's so much demand, and maybe a lack of workers who are able to fulfill that demand. And typically that would be an accessible way, but now that everyone's kind of in need of adapting accessibility in some form or fashion, it's a little harder for people who have kind of needed it for a while. I think if anything really comes out of all of this, I hope that people really do look at accessibility a little bit more and adapt ways that we can become a more accessible society, to be prepared for things like this when we need things that are out of reach or inaccessible to us in times like a pandemic. Obviously, on a little bit more of a serious note, if you are unfamiliar with kind of some of the updates on what's going on around the virus and everything in the world, luckily, if you are blind or visually impaired and you have a hard time getting access to accessible news, the NFB is offering their Newsline service, which is typically a paid service, subscription service, that provides updates and news reports in Braille and audio formats. So simply, if you are out of the loop on what's happening and an audio-based or Braille-based format is more accessible for you, I will have links to where to go to check out Newsline. Again, this is free for at least 2 months right now. It's 60 days from a couple of days ago. Definitely check it out. Might be one of the best ways for you to get updates on everything happening. So speaking on the topic of accessibility and technology, one of my favorite apps, Be My Eyes, is something that allows you to essentially get a free video call with a volunteer who is volunteering to be your eyes. So whether you're lacking sight or maybe you just need a second pair of eyes for whatever reason, you're able to just sign up for this app. It's free. and it sets you up with a video call. I actually sat down on a video call with Will, who is the VP of marketing for Be My Eyes, and we talked a little bit about his current situation, what it's like for him, and how Be My Eyes can kind of play a vital role in maybe your day-to-day right now as we are living in this different state of the world.
I'm Will. I'm the VP of community at Be My Eyes, and I am self-quarantined in my apartment in Los Angeles. The business model that we've set up allows us to offer this service for free to the blind population. And it's not just blind people, it's like anyone with a visual impairment, even all the way to a huge percentage of our users are just older adults who have trouble reading small print, locating small objects. It really is kind of for anyone. And if you don't have a visual impairment, you can be a volunteer. The service that Be My Eyes is providing, we're realizing, is more important than ever, because you have all of these people who are suddenly isolated, out of contact, can't make physical contact with other people, can't have tactile feedback, can't go into the grocery store and touch everything the way that you normally would, whatever it might be. And so having a pair of eyes to allow yourself to get visual information while maintaining a physical distance is like kind of like an invaluable service right now. Now is the time when some of the specialized help options could come in really handy as well. Like you're not able to like go out to your local tech support store or whatever. So like definitely take advantage of. We're really lucky that the Google and Microsoft disability support centers are still open. Their lines are still open. They're still taking Be My Eyes calls. They're really committed to continuing that service as long as they can. Again, that's free, and that's like a accessibility expert at Google or Microsoft will spend a lot of time on the phone with you, helping you get through whatever your tech support issue is. Awesome. We have the National Federation of the Blind as a specialized help provider. You can actually call another blind person and get support from an NFB representative to find out what your resources are. I know NFB's mobilizing a lot of, making sure to weigh in on COVID-19.
If you're interested in being a volunteer or a user of Be My Eyes, be sure to check out the description of this video because I will have a link on where to go to download that. Now, if you are blind or low vision and you have to conference, whether it be for work or school, or just to like get with groups of people together, luckily Zoom.us or Zoom.us is an accessible platform, so definitely check them out. They've been praised upon many of the blind folks in our community, so definitely look into using that platform. There's also FaceTime and potentially Google Hangouts, depending again on what you're looking to do exactly. An advocate in our community actually has gathered together a thread on Twitter about some accessible resources online, so definitely check that out. Her name is Holly Scott Gardner, and I'll have a link to her tweet thread in the description of this video. Speaking of Twitter and tweets, I actually just wanted to hear from you folks, like out there in the world, who are currently being impacted by this. So folks in my community, I try to reach out and just kind of hear what is happening. And I wanted to kind of highlight a few responses that I got, whether it be from Instagram or Twitter, because I think it's important to kind of talk about everyone's sort of situation. We are kind of still going through the same thing, but people have different circumstances, and it's just going to be different for everyone. So got a tweet here from Rel, and she's telling me that she hasn't dared to even go to the stores, and I don't blame you. I mean, shopping in person as a blind person is already kind of a hard experience. Luckily, oftentimes there are very nice folks who work at these stores or shopping centers that are willing to help assist with, the best etiquette that they possibly can. Sometimes they're trained on etiquette, sometimes they're not, but, they just try to help guide you through the store and find what you're looking for. Unfortunately, it's been a lot harder for some folks to do that because people are swamped. Staff is, less than what's normally there, and they are just, it's such a different time. But it has definitely impacted folks who are blind, low vision, who independently try to shop, or really don't have any other choice but to independently shop. Maybe they don't know someone who can help with that or is willing to. And then she also followed up with saying that her food delivery services are pretty much booked. They are just not. And yeah, I feel that same thing. I definitely have been going through the same thing, trying to check every few days if those shops are online are delivering again. It's been about a week since I've done any grocery shopping. I'm okay for now, but I just know when I am going to be looking to shop again, I might be presented with some issues that people are now bringing to light.
I may have learned that ordering groceries from Instacart or from whatever this service is my preferred way to get groceries. But if no one is delivering Instacart, what do? I can't just switch to another grocery service because the accessibility of that service might be questionable, right? So it's very much like not straightforward for blind people how to adjust when like services that are relatively dependable, like things like rideshare and grocery delivery, all these other things are starting to shut down, or to come into your house and handle a bunch of things that you've been handling, especially if it's someone you haven't had a lot of contact with. So the relationships with neighbors and all these other things can be kind of strained.
Over on Twitter, Dr. Evil Overlord made a good point that public transit, it's something that a lot of people use. I use myself sometimes. It's pretty much services have been limited or completely cut off in some cities, and that is tough. I mean, not that we should really be going out as much as we can avoid it, but for folks who do need to get around or go places, it's tough. Schedules have been completely delayed for when you do need to go to the doctors or get out to go to the grocery store. Here in LA, Metro has cut some of their services too. Andrew Green on Twitter also talked about how he is very much a tactile person. He is using things like sighted guides often, and that is a lot harder now when he is shopping, or maybe experiencing some accessibility bumps with websites that maybe aren't as accessible as they should be. And it's a good point. I mean, you're definitely washing your hands more because you're using your hands a lot on surfaces and objects and your environment. But it's definitely harder to also cope, and maybe you're now switching to cane more often.
As blind people, one of the skills we have to have is being relatively okay with asking people for help or asking strangers for help. But there is like a very real stigma right now about getting too close to someone or coming into too close of contact with someone. We're being told to social distance, and so it's not the same thing to ask someone to guide you across the street.
It's definitely hard to be a person who uses their hands for their eyes right about now. I'm kind of one of those people too. Something that's been brought up to my attention, whether it be through articles or actually folks reaching out and sharing this with me, is many folks have now switched to the virtual classroom online, remote learning, because their classes, whether it be at university or school, is now being shut down or canceled. The problem is with schools quickly trying to adapt and cater to the majority, many folks who use accommodations to interact with the internet or technology like screen readers and whatnot are getting left behind. Even deaf students are now not having properly captioned classroom sessions or seminars, or not always having an interpreter available because of this barrier. So even though schools are adapting what is in theory an accessible form of learning for many folks, they are not putting into consideration the actual accessibility accommodation needs for their students, who are now getting left behind and may not be able to finish their semesters or classes the way that they should be.
While y'all are, sitting around in quarantine, we're trying to keep pumping out that good content to try to keep everybody entertained. Mm-hmm. I have 2 podcasts now that I host for Be My Eyes. We have the Be My Eyes podcast, which is all interviews with really cool, interesting blind people. Mm-hmm. And we also have 13 Letters, which is our dedicated accessibility podcast, which has interviews with heads of accessibility from places like Apple, and their ideas are even more interesting now that we're going to this remote virtual model, which is really exposing a lot of the needs in digital accessibility. So, as
we've had a lot of time to ourselves during this whole thing, I want to talk about some media. I want to talk about different ways to entertain. And one of those is movies. And a lot of streaming platforms, I've noticed, have actually been releasing films that are currently in theaters because theaters are shutting down. So it's harder to go to the cinema and actually watch something. And for me, I've talked about this in previous videos. When I go to the cinema, I get a thing called audio descriptions. Audio descriptions, real fast, are just simply an extra track of audio that narrates the visual elements of a film. Essentially, it just makes visual medium accessible to those who are blind and low vision. I have videos all about that in particular if you want to check check those out, feel free to. As it's obviously harder to go to the cinema right now, I've been actually wondering what films out right now are accessible. What are some recommendations that people are watching, whether it be TV shows or actual movies? And I actually sat down with my friend Theresa, who runs an entire blog about Disney and accessibility and what streaming platforms are accessible, and runs like podcasts, and it's really cool. Check out her stuff too. But definitely, I just want you to hear her recommendations. Maybe you're looking for some new content to watch and you want it to be accessible with audio descriptions.
So I have a couple for the three platforms I mentioned, for Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime. Netflix, there's a series called On My Block, which they just launched their third season a couple weeks ago, but I feel like it's kind of gone under the radar. It's a really good coming of age story that has a lot of like heart and humor amidst some just really intense moments. I'm very glad I discovered it, and I hope more people start to watch it because I need to talk about this with somebody and I can't find anybody else who has watched it.
Gotcha.
But on Disney Plus, I know they've gotten a lot of praise about how all of their new content that they're developing for it all has audio description. But it kind of going under the radar too with them has been, they've been adding audio description for a lot of their older things. So a lot of like the animated shorts from the 30s, they've like every week have been adding audio description for a few. And I was really excited when I saw that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is a 1954 movie with Kirk Douglas, that also has audio description now, just because classic film in general, really hard to find any with audio description.
Yeah.
So I think most people are probably somewhat familiar with that, either from the novel or the Disney attraction that used to exist. But even for being a movie that's almost 70 years old now, it's still really engaging. The score is fantastic. And you can tell the audio description, it's one that they did recently because it's not as corny or overly dramatic like some of the older ones tend to be.
And then, yeah, Amazon. Anything you recommend there?
It's called Brittany Runs a Marathon. It's a movie about kind of finding your inner strength to respond to the universe when it feels like your world is falling apart. Because I think some people maybe can relate to that right now. That is such a significant message because there's so much uncertainty and so many people trying to figure out what's next or having to rethink plans that they maybe had started with and feeling overwhelmed by that. If you're looking for a good documentary on Disney Plus, they have one called Waking Sleeping Beauty. And it's basically about the time period of the mid-'80s when the Disney animation studio was really struggling up through the Disney Renaissance. It's really fascinating if you're not a huge Disney fan, just a look behind the scenes of filmmaking and when a studio does kind of go through that transition. The other one, it's on Amazon Prime, and it's called Honey Boy. Some people may have heard a little bit about it. It's the autobiographical film that Shia LaBeouf wrote. It's about his like childhood and his relationship with his father.
As we are in a global pandemic and people all over the world are being affected by this, maybe you are looking for more extensive content to watch. Actually, something I've been watching a lot is shows on Apple TV Plus, Dickinson, Mythic Quest, Little America. And when we talk accessibility, Apple TV Plus is not shy to embrace accessibility. In fact, they have over 8 languages with audio descriptions. I think 9 now. So be sure to check Apple TV Plus out because, again, you may find something that is in your native tongue and totally accessible to you. Now, another way to pass the time is definitely through gaming. Gaming can last quite some time, but the thing is there aren't too many accessible games. There just aren't many low vision or blind friendly titles out there. As a blind gamer myself, I try to find as many as I can, and fellow Legally Blind gamer Steve Saylor actually sat down with me and we talked about some of our favorite accessible games. He definitely chimed in on a few recommendations that you should definitely check out. So here's what he had to say.
I was being at home and kind of not really able to go out, so yeah, I've been playing a lot more games than I normally do. For right now, Animal Crossing just came out, so I've been playing quite a bit of that. And then I've also been kind of just jumping back into sort of older titles that either have been updated or just I haven't played in a while since like several versions of it or several patches have come out for it. Like Fortnite is definitely one of those. The Outer Worlds, it was created by a studio named Obsidian. When it came out a couple months ago, near the end of last year, it had really, really small text. And it was kind of hard for a lot of people to play. Like even those who didn't even have like a vision disability, they were finding that the text was pretty small. I'd say within the past 2 weeks, there was a developer at Obsidian that has spent the past 3 months working on a patch to be able to increase the font size within the game. And this is kind of like unheard of. Normally, a lot of games, when they put out a game, like a patch, like if they need to increase the font size after the game's been released, it's usually very minimal increase, and it's not really that noticeable. And so it's really hard for anyone to be able to kind of go back and be able to play it. But instead of it being just increasing the font size, they actually have a slider that you can be able to adjust the font size. There's actually a video on my YouTube channel about it, and it's like, it made it immensely more playable for me.
Wow, okay.
And I'm excited to be able to jump back in and try it out, because that is in the gaming accessibility side, that is kind of almost unheard of. Well, I would love to be able to say, like, most first-party Nintendo games generally are what I kind of call accidentally accessible.
Yeah, I can agree.
They are designed from an aspect of, they want to be able to, Nintendo designs their games to be, they want all ages to be able to play their games, so from small kids to seniors. So they kind of design based on that, and they kind of have accidental accessibility, so that's not really intentional. But majority of the first-party games there from Nintendo are pretty quote-unquote accessible. But the ones I really enjoy is a game called Celeste. It came out a couple years ago, and it's a platformer, so in the style of like a Super Mario, but it has a really cool, amazing story. But what they really added for accessibility was something that they called an assist mode, where it, by tweaking a few of the settings within the game itself, made the game more accessible for those who needed it, where you can turn on or off invincibility, you can adjust the game speed, you can adjust how many times you can be able to jump in a single session. So it's like, there's a few things in there, and they created it in a way that it was like, we understand our intention of the game is to be able to make this as cool a platform as possible, but we realize that this game may not be accessible for everyone. So if you want to be able to use this, you can, and it sort of set the bar as far as like what a modern platformer can be. There's another game called Way of the Passive Fist. It's done by actually an indie developer, actually here in Toronto. They created a game. It's sort of like in that old school Super Nintendo 16-bit Street Fighter kind of style. It's a fighting game. You are a quote-unquote pacifist, and you are essentially dodging all enemy attacks, and until the point where they get so tired that all it takes is one punch to knock them out. And it's kind of a neat little quirky title, but they put in so much accessibility into that for not only just low vision, but they also added stuff for like motor. If you have a motor disability, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, there's a lot of accessibility built in to that. And I always recommend that. And then the third game I would probably recommend, if you're not really into sort of like the old school retro style games, would be Gears 5. Gears 5 just recently came out. It's on Xbox. And they put a lot of effort into the accessibility into that game. They actually had a blind YouTuber who loves Gears. His name is Sightless Combat. And they actually brought him in to be able to help sort of help with the accessibility in that game. But they also even did a lot of accessibility work with deaf or hard of hearing. Actually was the very first game to receive a perfect score on a site called caniplaythat.com, which reviews video games from an accessibility standpoint. And it's the first time they've ever done that.
Wow. And again, all the recommendations that came from Theresa and Steve, be sure to check them out. They're going to be in the descriptions down below, and their content and channels will also be down there. So again, I just kind of want to leave you on a note. I am a very optimistic person. I think that we will get through this. I believe we will. This is only a temporary adjustment in our lives, and I think we got to just make the best of it that we can. Use the time that you have, and connect like you haven't in a long time. Let me know, what are you doing? What's happening? What are you consuming? What are you recommending down in the comments? I am all ears. Always have been all ears. I hope that you could see different today, thanks to some of our guests and maybe a little bit of what I had to say as well, and I will hear you next time. It's been about 11 days since LA's kind of been on lockdown. I ended up buying a guitar. Hey, I could either learn Braille or I could learn guitar, and I ended up going with guitar. Yeah, work in progress. I don't think I'm going to be doing this on video anytime soon.